The fluorescent lights flickered in the sterile corridor of Willowbrook State Hospital, New York, 1952, casting jagged shadows on the cracked linoleum floor. It was past midnight when a blood-curdling scream tore through the silence of Ward C, freezing the night shift nurses in their tracks. The sound wasn't human, at least it didn't feel like it. It was raw, primal, as if something caged deep within a soul had clawed its way out. The source? A patient known only as Patient 47, a man whose name was whispered in fear by orderlies and doctors alike. His file was sealed, his past a mystery, but the terror he instilled was undeniable. In that moment, as the scream echoed, a young nurse named Clara dropped her clipboard, her hands trembling, knowing she'd have to enter his room. What she saw in there would haunt her for the rest of her life. Imagine standing at the edge of that room, the door creaking open, the air thick with dread. What could drive a man to unleash such a sound? What secrets did he carry that made even seasoned psychiatrists avoid his gaze? This is no ordinary tale of mental illness. This is the story of Patient 47, a man whose presence turned a hospital ward into a battleground of fear, suspicion, and unspoken horrors. Behind his wild eyes and cryptic mutterings lies a truth so disturbing it threatens to unravel everything we think we know about the human mind. What makes a man a monster? Is it his actions, his thoughts, or something darker, something that defies explanation? As we peel back the layers of this case, you'll be drawn into a web of questions that linger like a chill in your bones. Was Patient 47 a victim of his own fractured psyche? Or was he something else entirely? Something that science couldn't contain? Stay with us until the end, because the answers will shake you to your core. This story isn't just about a man in a padded room. It's about the fragility of the human mind, the thin line between sanity and chaos, and how one person's darkness can cast a shadow over everyone around them. It's about the nurses who whispered prayers before entering his room, the doctors who questioned their own expertise, and the patients who swore they saw things in his presence that no one could explain. This case forces us to confront a terrifying truth. Sometimes, the real danger isn't locked away, it's already inside us all. If you're ready to dive into this chilling mystery, hit that like button to spread the word about the shadows lurking in the corners of our minds. In the comments, let us know you're ready by typing, "I'm ready to discover the truth about Patient 47." By doing so, you're joining a community of truth seekers, those brave enough to face the stories that others shy away from. Thank you for being here, for daring to look where others turn away. Prepare yourself, because what comes next contains a key revelation that will forever change the way you see the human mind. The heavy iron doors of Willowbrook State Hospital groaned as they swung open on a rainy October evening in 1952, admitting a man who would soon become the stuff of nightmares. Patient 47, as he would be known, arrived in the back of a police van, his wrists bound in heavy restraints that seemed more suited for a wild animal than a human being. The officers escorting him were pale, their eyes darting nervously as they handed over a thin, sealed envelope to Dr. Harold Grayson, the head psychiatrist of Ward C. "Don't open it unless you have to," one of them muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "And don't let him out of your sight." The rain battered the windows as the van sped away, leaving the hospital staff with a sinking feeling that something far worse than a storm had just entered their lives. Patient 47 was a tall, gaunt figure, his face obscured by a tangle of dark, matted hair that fell over his eyes. Those eyes, God, those eyes were the first thing anyone noticed. They weren't just intense. They seemed to burn with a strange, unplaceable energy, as if they could see through walls, through people, through time itself. When he was led through the ward, the other patients fell silent, their usual murmurs and cries replaced by an eerie stillness. Even the most volatile among them, men and women who would scream at shadows or fight orderlies without provocation, shrank back in their beds. It was as if they sensed something in him that no one else could articulate. Dr. Grayson, a man who prided himself on his rationality and decades of experience with the mentally ill, felt a chill as he reviewed the sparse details provided. The patient's real name was redacted, replaced only with the number 47. No birth date, no family history, no prior medical records, just a single line in the police report. Subject apprehended after incident at St. Mary's Church. Extreme caution advised. The sealed envelope, marked with a wax stamp bearing an unfamiliar insignia, sat unopened on Grayson's desk. He told himself he didn't need to open it yet. After all, he'd dealt with dangerous patients before. Paranoid schizophrenics, violent sociopaths, even a few who claimed to be possessed. But something about patient 47's presence made his usual confidence waver. The first night, the ward was restless. Nurses reported hearing whispers coming from patient 47's isolation room, though he was alone, strapped to a bed with reinforced leather restraints. Clara, the young nurse from that fateful night of the scream, swore she heard him muttering in a language she couldn't identify. Low, guttural, almost rhythmic, like a chant. When she peeked through the observation window, his head snapped toward her, his eyes locking onto hers through the reinforced glass. She stumbled back, her heart pounding, convinced he'd somehow known she was there before she even made a sound. He wasn't just looking at me, she later confided to a colleague, her voice trembling. He was looking into me. By morning, the rumors had spread like wildfire among the staff. Orderlies whispered about strange marks scratched into the walls of his room, marks that hadn't been there during the last inspection. One janitor claimed he saw shadows moving in the corner of the room, even though the overhead light was on. Dr. Grayson dismissed these as hysteria. Hospitals like Willowbrook were breeding grounds for superstition, especially in the 1950s when psychiatric care was as much about control as it was about treatment. But even he couldn't ignore the way the ward's atmosphere had shifted. The air felt heavier, the silence more oppressive, as if patient 47's arrival had brought something intangible with him, something that clung to the walls and seeped into the minds of everyone around. The other patients began to act strangely. A woman who hadn't spoken in years started muttering about the man with no shadow. A violent patient, known for his outbursts, refused to leave his bed, claiming he felt watched whenever he passed by room 47. Even the hospital's stray cat, which roamed the halls freely, hissed and fled whenever it neared the isolation wing. Dr. Grayson tried to maintain order, doubling the staff on Ward C and ordering nightly checks on patient 47's restraints. But the more they observed him, the more questions arose. Why did his medical chart list no medications, no diagnosis, no treatment plan? Why did the police refuse to provide more details about the incident at St. Mary's? And why, despite his restraints, did the door to his room sometimes creak open in the middle of the night as if inviting someone, or something, to enter? As the days passed, the staff began to notice patterns. Patient 47 never slept during the night, his eyes always open, staring at the ceiling or the walls. He refused food, yet showed no signs of weakness. When questioned, he spoke in riddles, his voice calm but laced with an unsettling certainty. "They're listening," he'd say, his lips curling into a faint smile. "They've always been listening." Who they were, he never explained, but his words sent shivers down the spines of even the most skeptical staff members. Clara, who had taken to avoiding his room whenever possible, began to have nightmares, vivid, terrifying dreams of a figure standing at the foot of her bed, its face hidden but its eyes unmistakably his. Dr. Grayson decided it was time to dig deeper. He scheduled an initial evaluation, hoping to uncover some clue about patient 47's condition. But as he prepared to enter the room, the sealed envelope on his desk seemed to loom larger, its wax seal almost glowing in the dim light of his office. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was inside would change everything, not just for him but for the entire ward. As he reached for the envelope, a distant scream echoed through the hospital, eerily similar to the one that had marked patient 47's first night. The ward was holding its breath, and Grayson knew that whatever came next would test the limits of his understanding of the human mind, and perhaps something far beyond it. Dr. Harold Grayson hesitated for a moment, his fingers hovering over the sealed envelope as another distant scream faded into the oppressive silence of Willowbrook State Hospital. The wax seal cracked under his thumb with a sound like breaking bone, and as he unfolded the yellowed paper inside, the words leaped out at him like accusations from the past. Patient 47, alias Jonathan Hale, apprehended July 15, 1952, following desecration and multiple assaults at St. Mary's Church, Manhattan. Witnesses report incoherent ravings about voices from the void and unnatural strength. Suspected ties to occult practices. Do not engage without restraints. History of institutionalization redacted per federal order. Grayson's brow furrowed. Federal order? This wasn't a standard psychiatric case. It reeked of something buried deep, perhaps by authorities who didn't want the public to know. The envelope contained more. Grainy photographs of the church scene, altar smeared with symbols that looked like ancient runes, and Hale's mugshot, his eyes staring directly into the camera with that same piercing intensity Clara had described. Grayson shoved the papers into his desk drawer, his mind racing. He couldn't delay the evaluation any longer. Armed with a notepad and a false sense of authority, he signaled to 2 burly orderlies to accompany him to room 47. The walk down the corridor felt interminable, the fluorescent lights buzzing like angry insects overhead. The other patients were unnaturally quiet, their eyes following the trio as if sensing the gravity of the moment. One elderly man, confined for dementia, clutched his bedsheets and whispered, "Don't wake it," his voice a raspy warning that sent a shiver down Grayson's spine. The orderlies, Tom and Elias, exchanged uneasy glances. Tom, a veteran of the ward, had seen his share of violent episodes, but even he gripped the keys tighter, his knuckles white. As they approached the door, a low hum emanated from within. Not quite a voice, but something rhythmic, almost musical, like a dirge played on unseen instruments. Grayson nodded, and Elias unlocked the door with a clang that echoed through the ward. Inside, the room was Spartan, white walls marred by faint scratches that resembled claw marks, a single bed with reinforced straps, and a small window barred against the outside world. Jonathan Hale, patient 47, lay restrained, his body still but his eyes alive, tracking their every move. The air was thick, stale, with an undercurrent of something metallic like blood or ozone after a storm. Grayson cleared his throat, pulling up a metal chair that scraped against the floor like nails on a chalkboard. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," he began, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. "I'm Dr. Grayson. I'd like to talk about why you're here." Hale's lips curved into a slow smile, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too perfect for a man who'd refused food for days. "Why I'm here," he echoed, his voice smooth, almost melodic, with an accent that Grayson couldn't place. Perhaps Eastern European or something older. "Doctor, you think you know, but the question is, why are you here?" Listening to the whispers? The orderlies shifted uncomfortably by the door, their presence a thin veil of security. Grayson ignored the bait, flipping open his notepad. "The police report mentions an incident at St. Mary's. Can you tell me what happened?" Hale's eyes narrowed, and for a moment the room seemed to dim, the light flickering as if a cloud had passed over the sun outside. "The church," he murmured, his gaze drifting to the ceiling. "They called to me there. The voices. They've always called, but that night they screamed. I had to answer. The priest. He tried to stop me, but he didn't understand. None of you do." Grayson's pen scratched across the paper. Delusions of auditory hallucinations, possible schizophrenia with paranoid features, but something didn't fit. Hale's demeanor was too composed, too articulate for a typical psychotic break. "Who are these voices, Jonathan?" "What do they say?" Hale's head snapped back, his eyes locking onto Grayson's with an intensity that made the doctor flinch. "They say your name, doctor. They know your secrets, the ones you hide from your wife, from yourself, the bottle in your desk drawer, the doubts that keep you awake at night." Grayson's heart skipped a beat. How could he know? The alcoholism was a private shame, confessed only in fleeting thoughts. He glanced at the orderlies, but they seemed oblivious, staring at the floor as if afraid to meet Hale's gaze. Composing himself, Grayson pressed on. "That's interesting. But let's focus on you. Your file mentions previous institutionalizations. Where were you before?" Hale chuckled, a low rumbling sound that vibrated through the room. "Before? There is no before, doctor. Only the endless now, where the voids intersect. I was in Arkham once. No, that's not right. Places blur. But they all end the same, with screams. Arkham?" Grayson made a note. Perhaps a reference to a fictional asylum or a misremembered name. But the way Hale said it sent a chill. It felt real, laden with history. As the evaluation continued, Hale's responses grew more cryptic, weaving tales of shadow entities that fed on human fear, of rituals performed under blood moons in forgotten corners of New York. He described visions of the city not as it was, but as a labyrinth of hidden doorways to other realms. Grayson tried to steer the conversation back to facts, the church incident, the assaults, but Hale deflected with personal barbs. "Your daughter, doctor. She cries at night, doesn't she? Wondering why her father chooses the mad over his family." Grayson froze, His daughter Emily was only 8, and yes, she had nightmares, but how? The room felt colder, the scratches on the walls seeming to deepen as if etched anew. Tom, the orderly, finally spoke up, his voice shaky. "Doc, maybe we should wrap this up." But Grayson waved him off, determined to crack the facade. Suddenly, Hale strained against his restraints, his muscles bulging unnaturally. The leather creaked, and for a heart-stopping second, Grayson thought they might snap. "They're here now," Hale hissed, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Watching through your eyes." The doctor leaned back, sweat beading on his forehead. This wasn't delusion. It felt like manipulation, a game where Hale held all the cards. Ending the session abruptly, Grayson stood, signaling the orderlies to secure the door. As they left, Hale's laughter followed them down the hall, soft at first, then building to a crescendo that made other patients stir in their beds. Back in his office, Grayson pored over the notes, his hands trembling. The evaluation had revealed little diagnostically, but personally, it had unnerved him. Hale knew things he shouldn't. Was it deduction? Coincidence? Or something more sinister? The photographs from the envelope lay scattered on his desk, the runes mocking him. He decided to consult a colleague, Dr. Evelyn Hart, a specialist in abnormal psychology who'd worked on cases involving cult influences. But as he reached for the phone, a knock at the door startled him. It was Clara, her face ashen. "Doctor, something's wrong in the ward. The patients, they're all whispering his name." Grayson followed her out, the hum from room 47 now audible even from afar, syncing with the pounding of his heart. Whatever Hale was, he wasn't just a patient, he was a catalyst, stirring the fragile minds around him into a frenzy. And as the night deepened, Grayson wondered if the real evaluation had been of him, not Hale. The disturbances escalated that evening. Patients who had been catatonic began rocking in their beds, muttering phrases that echoed Hale's riddles. One man, a war veteran with shell shock, drew symbols on the floor with his own blood from a self-inflicted wound, symbols matching those in the church photos. The staff was stretched thin, administering sedatives and isolating the affected. Clara confided in Grayson that she felt watched even in her quarters off-site. "It's like he's in my head," she said, tears welling. Grayson nodded, feeling the same insidious intrusion. He locked the envelope away, but its contents burned in his memory. Federal redaction suggested higher involvement, perhaps the FBI or something clandestine. He resolved to investigate St. Mary's himself, but for now the ward demanded his attention. As he patrolled the halls, the hum grew louder, a siren call that promised revelations but delivered only dread. Little did he know, the first evaluation was merely the opening act in a symphony of terror that would engulf Willowbrook entirely. Human. Continue. The whispers in Ward C had evolved into a cacophony by the time Dr. Grayson stepped out into the drizzling dawn of New York City, the hospital's grim facade fading behind him like a bad dream he couldn't quite shake. It was July 18, 1952, just 3 days after Jonathan Hale's arrival. But it felt like months, years even, in the way the ward's collective psyche had frayed. Patients who once babbled incoherently now chanted fragments of Hale's riddles in unison, their voices sinking during the quiet hours as if conducted by an invisible maestro. Clara, the nurse, had taken to carrying a rosary, her fingers worrying the beads as she administered medications, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights plagued by visions of shadowed figures lurking in corners. Grayson himself felt the weight, a persistent fog in his mind that made every decision feel labored, every thought tinged with doubt. He hailed a cab on Staten Island's rain-slicked streets, directing the driver to Manhattan's St. Mary's Church, the epicenter of whatever storm had birthed patient 47. As the cab crossed the ferry, the choppy waters of the harbor mirroring his turbulent thoughts, Grayson clutched the envelope's photographs in his coat pocket, their edges sharp against his palm like unspoken accusations. St. Mary's loomed on the corner of a bustling street, its Gothic spires piercing the overcast sky, a relic of old-world faith amid the modern hustle. The church's stone exterior bore no obvious scars from the incident, but as Grayson approached, he noticed the fresh paint on the heavy oak doors, a subtle sign of recent repairs. Inside, the air was thick with incense, masking something acrid underneath, perhaps the faint remnants of smoke or blood. Father Michael O'Reilly, a stout Irish priest with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetual frown, greeted him in the vestibule, his handshake firm but his eyes wary. "Dr. Grayson? From Willowbrook?" I was expecting someone might come sniffing around. The police said it was handled, but these things, they linger. O'Reilly led him to the sacristy, a small room cluttered with vestments and candles where they could speak privately. The priest poured 2 fingers of whiskey into chipped glasses, sliding one across the table. "You'll need it, lad. What happened here wasn't natural." As O'Reilly recounted the night of July 15th, his voice dropped to a hush as if the walls themselves might eavesdrop. It had started with a late evening confessional. Hale, though he hadn't given his name then, entered the booth, his presence announced by a chill that made the priest shiver despite the summer heat. He spoke of sins not his own, O'Reilly said, his brogue thickening with emotion, voices that commanded him to desecrate the holy. I tried to absolve him, but he laughed, a sound like glass shattering in hell. The confession escalated. Hale began chanting in Latin, or what sounded like it but twisted, inverted. The priest emerged to confront him, only to find Hale at the altar carving symbols into the wood with a knife that appeared from nowhere. Parishioners who lingered for evening prayers witnessed the chaos. Hale overturning candelabras, flames licking the pews as he ranted about the void's emissaries and the awakening. When O'Reilly and 2 altar boys tried to restrain him, Hale displayed inhuman strength, hurling them aside like rag dolls. One boy suffered a broken arm, the priest a concussion. "His eyes," O'Reilly whispered, draining his glass. "They glowed, doctor. Not figuratively, literally like coals in a forge." Grayson pulled out the photographs, spreading them on the table. The runes matched O'Reilly's description, swirling patterns that resembled no known language yet evoked a primal unease. The priest crossed himself, averting his gaze. We called the police, but by then he'd calmed, sitting cross-legged amid the wreckage, smiling as if he'd won some game. They took him away, but not before he looked at me and said, "Father, your flock hears me now." And God help me, some do. A few parishioners have come back, confessing nightmares, hearing whispers. Grayson probed for details. Had Hale mentioned his past? Any accomplices? O'Reilly shook his head. Nothing. But I did find this. He produced a small leather-bound book from a drawer, its cover embossed with faded gold. A journal, pages filled with cramped handwriting and sketches mirroring the runes. It was clutched in his hand when we found him. The police overlooked it. I hid it, thinking it cursed. Flipping through the journal, Grayson felt a surge of intrigue mixed with dread. Entries dated back years, describing visions of other realms bleeding into our own. Experiments with occult rituals in abandoned subways and forgotten tenements. Names appeared, redacted in his mind like the federal orders. Associates, perhaps, or victims. One passage stood out. The voices promise power, but the price is the soul's unraveling. I am their conduit, and through me they will terrify the wards of the mad. Wards, like Willowbrook. Grayson pocketed the journal with O'Reilly's reluctant blessing, promising to return it once deciphered. As he left the church, a parishioner, an elderly woman with haunted eyes, grabbed his arm. "You took him away, but he's still here," she hissed, pointing to her temple. "In all of us." Back at Willowbrook by midday, the ward was in disarray. Clara met him at the entrance, her uniform disheveled. "It's worse, doctor. 3 patients attempted self-harm this morning, carving symbols into their arms." Grayson rushed to the infirmary, where the afflicted lay bandaged, their wounds eerily precise replicas of the church runes. One patient, a young woman named Sarah with a history of depression, murmured Hale's phrases in her sleep. The void listens. Grayson conferred with Dr. Evelyn Hart, whom he'd summoned earlier. Hart, a sharp-witted woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor, examined the journal and photographs. "This isn't schizophrenia, Harold. It's suggestive of mass hysteria, perhaps induced by Hale's charisma or something else. Cult leader tactics, but amplified." She suggested hypnosis sessions to probe Hale's subconscious, but Grayson hesitated, recalling the evaluation's personal intrusions. That afternoon, as storm clouds gathered outside, Grayson visited Hale again, journal in hand. The orderlies double-checked the restraints, their faces pale. Hale's eyes lit up at the sight of the book. The father shared his secret. Good. The pieces move. Grayson demanded explanations, the runes, the voices, the church. Hale leaned forward as much as the straps allowed, his breath hot and fetid. "The runes are keys, doctor. to doors you don't want opened. The voices? They're the ones who've always been there, in the silence between thoughts. And the church? A stage for the awakening. But you're part of it now. Feel them, don't you? Nibbling at your edges. Grayson felt a headache bloom, visions flashing, his daughter's face twisted in fear, his wife's accusatory stare. He slammed the journal down, storming out as Hale's laughter pursued him. The investigation had only deepened the mystery, revealing layers of occult intrigue that clashed with Grayson's scientific worldview. He spent the evening in his office poring over the journal with heart, decoding fragments that hinted at a network of conduits across the city. People like Hale, touched by the void. Reports from the ward trickled in, lights flickering in sync with Hale's breathing, shadows lengthening unnaturally. Clara reported a new symptom among staff, shared dreams of a vast starless abyss where voices called their names. Grayson wondered if the federal redaction hid a larger conspiracy, perhaps government experiments gone awry. As night fell, a thunderclap shook the hospital, and from room 47 came a chant, echoed faintly by the ward. The investigation was no longer about diagnosis, it was about containment, before the terror spread beyond the walls. But as Grayson locked eyes with his reflection in the window, he saw a flicker, not his own but Hale's smile superimposed, whispering promises of revelation and ruin. The thunderclap's echo still reverberated through Dr. Grayson's bones as he tore his gaze from the window, the ghostly overlay of Jonathan Hale's smile dissolving like mist in the lamplight of his office. It was well past midnight on July 18, 1952, and Willowbrook State Hospital felt like a pressure cooker on the verge of explosion. The faint chanting from room 47 had seeped into the ward like an insidious fog, with patients murmuring in their sleep, their words sinking in a dissonant harmony that made the night nurses pace nervously. Grayson rubbed his temples, the headache from earlier now a pounding drumbeat, each throb whispering fragments of Hale's riddles. He couldn't dismiss it as coincidence anymore. The shared dreams, the symbols, the personal intrusions. Containment, yes, but how? Science demanded evidence, yet everything pointed to the inexplicable. Dr. Evelyn Hart, still poring over the journal with him, suggested the next step, hypnosis. If we can't crack him consciously, let's delve into the subconscious, she said, her voice steady but her eyes betraying a flicker of fear. Grayson agreed, though his gut twisted at the thought of getting closer to whatever lurked in Hale's mind. The following morning dawned gray and oppressive, the rain unrelenting as if the heavens themselves wept over Willowbrook. Grayson assembled a small team, Hart for her expertise in hypnotherapy, Clara as a witness despite her reluctance, and the orderlies Tom and Elias for security. They prepared room 47 with additional restraints, chains this time bolted to the floor, and dimmed the lights to a soft glow, the air heavy with the scent of antiseptic and underlying decay. Hale was wheeled in on a gurney, his body limp from a mild sedative, but his eyes snapped open as they entered, alert and amused. "Ah, the delving," he murmured, his voice a silken thread. "You think you can fish in these waters without drowning?" Grayson ignored him, nodding to Hart to begin. She positioned herself at Hale's side, her pendulum, a simple silver watch on a chain, swinging gently in the lamplight. "Focus on the watch, Jonathan," she intoned, her tone calm, authoritative. "Let your eyelids grow heavy." The session started smoothly, Hale's breathing slowing, his eyes fluttering shut as Hart guided him deeper. The ward outside fell unusually quiet, as if holding its breath. Grayson watched intently, notepad ready, while Clara stood by the door, her rosary clenched in her fist. "You're in a safe place now," Hart continued. "Tell us about the voices. When did they begin?" Hale's lips parted, his voice distant, dreamlike. "The voices. They came in the cradle. Mother sang lullabies, but they sang back from the shadows under the bed. They promised secrets, power, but always a price." Grayson leaned forward. This was progress. A childhood onset, perhaps trauma-induced delusions. But as Hart probed further, Hale's body tensed, his restraints creaking. "What do they want, Jonathan?" she asked. "They want entry," he whispered. "Through me, through all. The void hungers for form." Suddenly the room's temperature plummeted, breath visible in the air like frost on a winter pane. Clara gasped, crossing herself. Hale's eyes remained closed, but his voice changed. Deeper multiplicity, as if several spoke at once. "We are legion, Doctor. We see your fears. The daughter who will die young, the wife who betrays. Grayson's blood ran cold. Emily's fragile health was a secret worry. His marriage strained but private. Hart pressed on undeterred. Tell us about the church. Why desecrate it? Hale's head lolled, a smile creeping across his face. The church, a nexus, thin veil there. We carved the keys to open doors. The priest felt us, oh yes. His faith cracked like eggshell. The pendulum swung erratically now, as if pulled by unseen forces. Tom shifted uneasily, whispering to Elias, "This ain't right, man." As the hypnosis deepened, Hale described visions. A childhood in rural New York, abandoned mines where he first heard the calls, rituals with stolen books from forbidden libraries. The network, he murmured. Others like me, conduits scattered. In asylums, prisons, churches. We prepare the way. Grayson exchanged a glance with Hart. This aligned with the journal's hints of a cult or conspiracy. But then, Hale's body arched, a low growl emanating from his throat. The lights flickered, bulbs humming with strain. "You're meddling," the voices snarled, no longer Hale's alone. "Feel us now." In that moment, everyone in the room felt it. A pressure in their minds, images flashing unbidden. Grayson saw his daughter coughing blood alone in a dark room. Hart clutched her head, murmuring about lost loved ones. Clara screamed, collapsing to her knees. Visions of shadowed figures clawing at her skin. Even the orderlies faltered. Tom dropping to the floor in a fetal position. Elias backing against the wall, eyes wide with terror. Hart snapped the pendulum away, her voice breaking as she brought Hale out of trance. "Wake up, Jonathan, now!" Hale's eyes opened slowly, his expression serene. "Did you find what you sought?" he asked innocently, as if nothing had happened. The room warmed gradually, the lights stabilizing, but the damage was done. Clara was hysterical, babbling about demons. Tom muttered incoherently, later diagnosed with acute anxiety. Elias refused to enter the room again, requesting transfer. Grayson helped Hart to her feet. She was shaken, her scientific poise cracked. "That wasn't hypnosis," she whispered. "That was invasion." They evacuated the room, leaving Hale chuckling softly behind them. In the corridor, the ward erupted, patients banging on doors, screaming phrases from Hale's session. "The void hungers." Grayson sequestered the team in his office, administering sedatives and coffee. They debriefed haltingly, each recounting their visions, personal, intimate fears manifested. "Mass suggestion?" Grayson posited weakly, but Hart shook her head. "No, Harold. This is beyond psychology. The journal mentions psychic conduits. Maybe it's real, some form of telepathy, amplified by whatever he is." They pored over the entries again, finding references to similar incidents in other institutions. Wards terrorized, staff driven mad. One passage chillingly noted, "The hypnosis opens the floodgates. Use with caution, for they will use it back." Hale had known, anticipated. Grayson felt violated, his mind no longer his own sanctuary. Clara, recovering slowly, confided her vision. Hale standing over her bed, whispering her deceased mother's name, revealing secrets only she knew. By afternoon, the ward's chaos demanded action. Grayson ordered isolation for the most affected patients, but it spread like contagion. Nurses reporting headaches, orderlies seeing shadows. He contacted federal authorities via the redacted channels in the envelope, but the line went dead mid-call, a voice on the other end warning, "Don't dig deeper." Paranoia set in. Was the government involved, suppressing something? Hart suggested consulting an occult expert, a professor from Columbia University rumored to study parapsychology. Grayson resisted, science first, but the hypnosis had blurred lines. As evening fell, he visited Hale once more, alone this time, defiance fueling him. "What are you?" he demanded through the observation window. Hale turned, eyes gleaming. "I'm the mirror, Doctor, reflecting what's already there." The session had unraveled more than Hale's mind. It had frayed the fabric of reality in Willowbrook. Patients now formed crude circles in their rooms, chanting. Symbols appeared etched on windows, fogging with breath that wasn't there. Clara resigned that night, fleeing the hospital with tears streaming. Grayson lay awake in his quarters, visions replaying, doubting his sanity. The investigation had morphed into survival. The hypnosis, a key that unlocked not answers, but a Pandora's box of horrors. And as the clock ticked toward midnight, a new sound emerged from the ward. a collective sigh as if the building itself exhaled, welcoming the encroaching void. The collective sigh that emanated from Willowbrook's walls lingered in Dr. Grayson's ears like a final breath before a plunge into abyss, as he stumbled from his quarters into the dimly lit corridors on the night of July 19th, 1952. The hospital, once a bastion of order amid the chaos of broken minds, now pulsed with an unnatural life of its own, the very structure seeming to conspire with the encroaching darkness. The hypnosis session's aftermath had rippled outward like a stone thrown into a stagnant pond, disturbing depths that should have remained untouched. Patients who had been mere spectators to Hale's aura now became active participants in a symphony of delirium, their mutterings evolving into coordinated chants that echoed through the vents and pipes, carrying Jonathan Hale's cryptic prophecies to every corner. Grayson, his face gaunt from lack of sleep, gripped a flashlight as the power flickered intermittently, casting elongated shadows that danced mockingly on the walls. He had sent Dr. Hart home earlier, her nerves frayed beyond repair, but now he regretted it. Isolation amplified the terror, making every creak and whisper feel like Hale's personal taunt. Nurse Margaret, Clara's replacement, a sturdy woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense attitude honed from years in asylums, met him at the nurse's station, her uniform stained with what looked like ink but smelled faintly of blood. "It's spreading, doctor," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper, eyes darting to the shadows. Started with Sarah in room 12. She woke screaming about the void, then she started drawing. Grayson followed her to the room, where Sarah, the young depressive from earlier, sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers raw and bleeding as she etched runes into the linoleum with her nails. The symbols matched those from the church and journal precisely, glowing faintly under the flashlight's beam as if infused with an inner light. Sarah's eyes were vacant, but her lips moved in silent recitation. The conduit calls, the flock answers. Grayson knelt, trying to pull her hands away, but she resisted with surprising strength, her gaze snapping to his. "He's in you too, doctor. The doubts, the failures, they feed him." Her words pierced like daggers, echoing the visions from the hypnosis, stirring his buried guilt over his family's neglect. As they sedated Sarah and moved her to isolation, reports flooded in from across the ward. In the men's section, the war veteran who had drawn symbols before now led a group of patients in a bizarre ritual, linking hands in a circle and humming Hale's dirge. Orderlies broke it up, but not before one man collapsed, foaming at the mouth, his last words a garbled warning. "The shadows walk." Elias, the orderly who had faltered during hypnosis, refused duty, locking himself in the break room and babbling about figures in the mirrors. Tom, more resilient, confided in Grayson as they patrolled. "I saw my brother last night. Doc died in the war, but there he was, standing at the foot of my bed, mouth sewn shut, pointing to room 47. The spread wasn't just psychological. Physical anomalies manifested. Clocks running backward, water from faucets turning murky and viscous, whispers emanating from empty rooms. Grayson documented it all in a frantic journal of his own, his handwriting shaky, questioning if this was collective hysteria or something paranormal bleeding into reality. Desperation drove Grayson to action. He rifled through the original envelope again, finding a hidden compartment with a phone number scrawled in faded ink. No name. Just in case of escalation. Swallowing his pride, he dialed from his office, the line crackling with static that sounded like distant laughter. A voice answered on the third ring, curt and authoritative. "Agent Harlan, Federal Bureau. State your clearance." Grayson explained the situation. The church, the journal, the hypnosis, the spreading madness. His words tumbling out in a rush. Harlan listened silently, then sighed. "You opened the envelope." "Damn it, doctor. Hale isn't just a patient. He's a subject. Project Echo classified. Voices aren't delusions, they're signals. Stay put. Teams en route." The line went dead, leaving Grayson stunned. Federal involvement confirmed his suspicions. Hale was no ordinary madman, but part of something engineered, perhaps Cold War experiments with mind control or occult weaponry. The journal's references to conduits suddenly clicked, human antennas for otherworldly or psychological warfare. But waiting proved torturous. As midnight approached, the ward descended into pandemonium. Lights shattered in a cascade, plunging sections into darkness illuminated only by emergency lanterns. Patients broke free from restraints, not through force but as if the leather dissolved, their movements synchronized like puppets on strings. In the common area, a melee erupted. Men and women clawing at each other, not in violence but in frantic attempts to connect, forming human chains that pulsed with Hale's chant. Grayson and the remaining staff fought to restore order, administering Thorazine injections amid the chaos. But the drugs seemed ineffective, patients laughing through the haze. Margaret was injured when a patient grabbed her, whispering intimate secrets about her late husband, driving her to tears. "How do they know?" she sobbed, bandaging her arm. Grayson had no answer. The madness was infectious, personal horrors weaponized. In the eye of the storm, Grayson ventured to room 47, flashlight piercing the gloom. Hale sat upright, restraints intact but his presence amplified, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. "The spread," he intoned, voice carrying over the din. "Beautiful, isn't it? Like roots delving deep." Grayson pressed against the glass. "What is Project Echo?" "Who are you really?" Hale's smile widened. "Echo? A name for the echo of gods long silenced. I am the first but not the last. Your call to Harlan. It accelerates the awakening." A chill ran through Grayson. Had he unwittingly escalated? Outside sirens wailed, federal agents arriving. But as shadows lengthened unnaturally, wrapping around bedposts and door frames, he wondered if help would come too late. The agents burst in shortly after. Black-suited men with stern faces and briefcases, led by Harlan, a tall figure with a scar across his cheek. They secured the ward with military precision, tranquilizing the rampant patients and isolating Hale under heavy guard. Harlan pulled Grayson aside. Hale was exposed during a ritual in 48, government op to harness psychic phenomena. Went wrong. He became a broadcaster, amplifying fears, inducing hallucinations. The voices? Interdimensional bleed, or so the eggheads say. Grayson showed the journal. Harlan nodded grimly. Copies exist. Network of subjects. We're containing, but Willowbrook's compromised. As they spoke, a scream pierced the night. A patient in isolation, eyes rolled back, body convulsing as if possessed. The spread continued, defying containment. Shadows now manifesting as tangible forms, brushing against skin like icy fingers. By dawn, the ward was subdued, but the toll was evident. Staff traumatized. Patients regressed, Grayson questioning reality. Harlan promised relocation for Hale but warned, "It doesn't end. Echoes linger." Grayson nodded, feeling the madness's residue in his veins, a subtle whisper urging surrender. The night had transformed Willowbrook from hospital to haunted ground. The spread of madness a revelation that human minds were fragile vessels, easily breached by the unknown. And as the sun rose weakly, casting pale light on the etched symbols, Grayson knew the battle was far from over. The void's hunger only whetted. The weak sunlight filtering through the barred windows of Willowbrook State Hospital did little to dispel the pall of dread that hung over the ward like a shroud. As Dr. Harold Grayson stood amid the subdued chaos on the morning of July 20th, 1952, the federal agents, led by the scarred Agent Harlan, had imposed a semblance of order overnight, their black suits and clipped commands transforming the hospital into a makeshift command center. Tranquilized patients lay in their beds, their chants silenced but their faces twisted in uneasy slumber, as if the void's whispers still danced in their dreams. Grayson, his eyes bloodshot from another sleepless night, watched as the agents cordoned off room 47 with yellow tape marked classified. Their equipment, strange devices with dials and antennas, humming softly in the background. Harlan approached, a clipboard in hand, his expression as unreadable as a stone mask. "Relocation starts at noon, Doctor. Hale's being transferred to a secure facility upstate. Your cooperation is mandatory. Any leaks and you'll be buried in paperwork or worse." Grayson nodded numbly, his mind reeling from the revelations. Project Echo, psychic phenomena, interdimensional bleed. It sounded like science fiction, but the etched symbols on the walls, still faintly glowing, argued otherwise. He felt like a pawn in a game whose rules he barely understood, the madness's residue clinging to him like invisible cobwebs. As the morning progressed, the agents prepared for the move with military efficiency. They injected Hale with a heavy sedative, one Harlan claimed was experimental, blocks the signals. Hale's body went limp on the gurney, his piercing eyes finally closing, but even in repose his presence loomed. The air around him thicker, charged. The orderlies, Tom among them, assisted reluctantly, their hands trembling as they wheeled the gurney down the corridor. Elias had vanished overnight, his locker emptied, whispers among staff suggesting he'd fled into the city driven mad. Nurse Margaret, bandaged but resolute, monitored the other patients, noting how their vital signs spiked as the gurney passed, hearts racing in unison like a collective pulse. Grayson walked alongside Harlan, probing for more details. What is this facility? And Project Echo, how did it start? Harlan glanced sideways, his scar twitching. Post-war experiments, Doctor. Captured Nazi occult tech mixed with our own psychotronics. Hale was a volunteer, ex-soldier, broken by the trenches. They opened something in him, a door that won't close. Now he's a broadcaster infecting minds like a virus. Grayson shivered. It explained the spread, the personal visions. Hale as a human radio tower for terrors from beyond. The convoy assembled in the hospital's courtyard. 2 black sedans and an armored van, engines idling under the overcast sky. Rain threatened again, the air humid and oppressive, carrying the faint scent of ozone that Grayson now associated with Hale's influence. As they loaded the gurney into the van, a low murmur rippled through the watching staff clustered at the windows like ghosts. One patient, awake despite sedation, pressed his face to the glass and whispered, "He's leaving, but staying." Harlan slammed the van doors, signaling the drivers. "Mount up." Non-stop to Blackwood site. Grayson was assigned to ride in the lead sedan, Harlan beside him, 2 agents in front. As the convoy pulled out of Willowbrook's gates, the hospital receding in the rear view, Grayson felt a momentary relief. The terror exported. Perhaps the ward could heal. But as they crossed the ferry to Manhattan, the water choppy and gray, unease gnawed at him. Harlan's radio crackled with static, voices distorted. Echo containment holding. Wait, anomaly detected. It started subtly. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel, his knuckles white. "Feeling dizzy, sir," he muttered. Harlan barked, "Push through." But then the radio erupted in chaos. Screams from the van behind, tires screeching as it swerved. Grayson twisted in his seat, heart pounding, to see the van fishtail on the wet road, agents inside banging on the partitions. "He's awake," came a frantic shout over the comms. Eyes open, God, the eyes. The convoy halted on a deserted stretch of highway, agents piling out with weapons drawn, pistols and strange rifles that hummed like the devices at Willowbrook. Harlan cursed, yanking Grayson along. "Stay back!" The van's rear doors burst open, not from force but as if unlocked from within. Hale stood there, restraints dangling loosely, his smile serene amid the pandemonium. The sedatives hadn't worked. Or worse, he'd feigned their effect. The agents opened fire, tranquilizer darts first. But Hale moved with unnatural speed, dodging like a shadow, his voice booming over the rain. "You can't relocate the void, gentlemen. It's everywhere." Panic ensued. One agent clutched his head, dropping his weapon as visions assaulted him. Personal horrors manifesting. "My son, no," he screamed, collapsing in convulsions. Another turned his gun on a comrade, eyes glazed, muttering Hale's riddles. Grayson backed away, rain soaking his coat as Harlan fired live rounds now, bullets whizzing past Hale, who seemed untouchable, the air warping around him like heat haze. "Project Echo was your mistake," Hale intoned, advancing slowly. "You opened the door. I am the threshold." Lightning cracked overhead, illuminating the scene in stark flashes. Agents writhing on the ground, the van's interior smeared with symbols that appeared from nowhere. Grayson felt the pull again, the whispers in his mind, showing Emily's frail form, his wife's tear-streaked face, but now twisted with accusations. "You brought this home, Father." He fell to his knees, clutching his temples, the madness surging like a tide. Harlan, scarred veteran of unseen wars, stood his ground, unloading his clip. But Hale reached him, a hand on his shoulder, and Harlan froze, eyes widening in recognition. You were there." "At the beginning," Hale nodded. "The first conduit. You closed the file but not the gate." In a blur, Harlan turned his gun on himself but hesitated, trembling. The surviving agents, seeing their leader falter, fled into the woods bordering the highway, their screams echoing. Hale turned to Grayson, extending a hand. "Join us, Doctor. See the truths beyond." Grayson scrambled back, horror rooting him as the rain intensified, washing blood from the pavement. Sirens wailed in the distance, local police perhaps, but Hale vanished into the storm, his form dissolving like ink in water. The van stood empty, restraints intact but empty, symbols pulsing faintly on the walls. Hours later, back at Willowbrook under heavy guard, Grayson debriefed with shaken reinforcements from Harlan's agency. Harlan himself was catatonic, staring vacantly, muttering about the beginning. The relocation had failed spectacularly, Hale escaping not just physically, but amplifying his influence. Reports trickled in. Sightings in the city, churches defaced anew, civilians reporting nightmares. The ward thought to be relieved erupted again, patients awakening with Hale's eyes chanting his return. Margaret confided in Grayson, her voice breaking. "He's not gone. He's in the walls now." Grayson nodded, feeling the void's tendrils in his own thoughts, doubts blooming into paranoia. The attempt had revealed more. Hale wasn't just a subject. He was the project's unintended master, turning the tables on his creators. As night fell, shadows lengthened once more, whispers evolving into laughter, the hospital a nexus for the spreading terror. Grayson locked himself in his office, journal in hand, scribbling warnings, but the pen seemed to move of its own accord, etching runes that promised more revelations, and ruin. The runes etched by Dr. Grayson's seemingly autonomous pen glowed faintly on the page of his journal, casting an otherworldly luminescence across the cluttered desk in his office at Willowbrook State Hospital. As the clock struck midnight on July 21, 1952, the failed relocation attempt had left the facility in a state of siege, federal agents patrolling the halls with rifles at the ready, their faces masks of grim determination masking underlying fear. Harlan, the scarred agent, remained catatonic in a makeshift infirmary, his mutterings about the beginning a constant, haunting backdrop to the night's unrest. Grayson stared at his hand, still gripping the pen, feeling a foreign presence guiding his movements as if Jonathan Hale's essence had infiltrated his very sinews. The symbols, swirling vortices that resembled eyes staring back, pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, whispering promises of knowledge too vast for mortal comprehension. He slammed the journal shut, but the whispers persisted in his mind, evolving from faint echoes to insistent demands. "Embrace us, Doctor. Become the conduit." Sweat beaded on his forehead, the room's temperature fluctuating wildly, hot one moment like a fever dream, cold the next like the grave's chill. Outside, the ward had transformed into a nightmarish tableau. Patients, no longer subdued by the agent's tranquilizers, roamed freely in some sections where locks had mysteriously failed, their eyes reflecting Hale's piercing gaze as they formed eerie processions down the corridors. Symbols appeared on every surface. Walls, floors, even the ceilings, etched not by hands but as if burned into reality by unseen forces. Nurse Margaret, one of the few staff remaining, barricaded herself in the nurses' station, radioing for external help that never came. Phone lines crackled with static laced with laughter. "It's in the air now," she had told Grayson earlier, her voice trembling over the intercom, breathing it in like poison. The federal reinforcements, promised by Harlan's superiors, were delayed by a freak storm that raged over New York. Lightning strikes illuminating the hospital in staccato bursts, each flash revealing shadows that moved independently of their casters. Grayson ventured out, flashlight in hand, his white coat stained with ink and sweat, determined to reclaim some control amid the encroaching void. As he navigated the halls, the embraces of the void manifested in horrifying ways. In one room, a group of patients huddled together, their bodies contorting in unnatural angles, whispering secrets to each other, secrets that belonged to the staff. "Dr. Grayson neglects his daughter," one hissed, her voice not her own. "Emily wastes away while he chases ghosts." Grayson flinched, the words slicing through his defenses, stirring guilt that Hale had weaponized. He burst into the room, separating them with the orderly's help. But as he touched one patient, a jolt surged through him, visions flooding his mind. Hale's childhood in the mines, dark rituals under moonless skies, government men in suits observing as the first echo tore through a test subject. It was a memory not his, implanted like a parasite. Staggering back, Grayson realized the embrace wasn't metaphorical. It was assimilation, minds merging into a collective under Hale's influence. The agents, meanwhile, set up a command post in the lobby, their equipment beeping erratically as they tried to jam the signals, devices from Project Echo's arsenal, Antennas pointed at room 47, now empty but still the epicenter. One agent, a young man named Reyes, confided in Grayson during a brief lull. "We thought we could control it, Doc. After the war, we scavenged those Nazi books, Die Glocke, Vril Energy. Hale was our breakthrough, but he broke us instead." Reyes showed a classified file. Photos of similar incidents in other facilities. Wards turned to asylums of the damned, staff driven to suicide. "The void's embraced, that's what they call it. Once it starts, it's exponential." As if to prove his point, a scream echoed from the east wing. An agent had turned on his partner, eyes vacant, muttering, "Join the chorus." Gunfire rang out. Brief and final, the void claiming more souls. Grayson, piecing together the fragments from visions and files, hypothesized a desperate plan. Confront the source. Not Hale's body, but the door he represented. Armed with the journal, both his and Hale's, he made his way to the basement where the hospital's old electroshock therapy room lay abandoned, its machines gathering dust like relics of a barbaric era. The air down there was thicker, charged with static that made hairs stand on end. Shadows coalesced into forms, whispering temptations. Power over illness, cures for Emily, redemption for his failures. Grayson resisted, chanting medical mantras to ground himself. This is delusion. Mass psychosis amplified. But the visions intensified. His wife leaving him. Emily's tiny coffin, the ward engulfed in flames. He reached the room, flipping switches on the old equipment, sparks flying as power surged inconsistently. Suddenly, Hale materialized, not in flesh, but as an apparition, his form shimmering like heat over pavement. "You've come to embrace," he said, voice multi-layered, echoing from the walls. Grayson brandished the journals. "No, to close the door." He recited runes backward, pieced from the visions, hooking electrodes to himself in a mad bid to short-circuit the connection. Electricity hummed, the room lighting up as Hale's form advanced, tendrils of shadow reaching out. "You can't close what's always open," Hale intoned. "The human mind is the void's playground." The shock hit Grayson, his body convulsing, mind flooding with cosmic horrors, starless expanses, entities ancient and hungry, feeding on fear. He saw Project Echo's origin, a ritual in a desert bunker, scientists invoking what they couldn't control, Hale as the unwitting vessel. Pain seared through him, but in the agony, clarity. The embrace required consent, fear as the key. Upstairs, the ward felt the ripple. Patients froze mid-chant, agents pausing in their frenzy. Margaret peeked out, hope flickering as shadows receded slightly. But in the basement, the confrontation peaked. Hale's apparition pressed close, whispering Grayson's deepest secret. A childhood trauma buried deep. A sibling's death he blamed himself for. "Embrace it and rule," Grayson screamed, "no." Channeling the electricity not just through himself, but imagining it as a barrier, sealing the mental breach. The apparition flickered, Hale's voice cracking with surprise. "You resist?" The room exploded in light, machines overloading, plunging the basement into darkness. Grayson awoke hours later, agents hauling him up, the storm outside breaking. The ward was quieter, patients stirring as if from a collective nightmare, symbols fading from walls. Harlan blinked awake, coherence returning. "It's stopped?" But Grayson knew better. The embrace had been stalled, not ended. Hale's physical form was still out there. The void's tendrils retracted but waiting. As dawn broke, weak rays piercing the clouds, Grayson bandaged his burns, journal clutched tight. The hospital breathed easier, but the doctor felt changed, touched by the abyss, forever vigilant against its return. Whispers lingered faintly, a reminder that the embrace was patient, eternal, ready to unfold once more. The pale dawn light that seeped through the grimy windows of Willowbrook State Hospital offered only a fragile illusion of respite. As Dr. Harold Grayson slumped against the basement wall, his body aching from the electrical burns, and his mind reeling from the void's reluctant retreat on that fateful morning of July 21st, 1952. The old electroshock machines smoked faintly, their circuits fried in the desperate bid to seal the mental breach, and for a fleeting moment, the whispers had dimmed to a distant hum, like the fading echo of a nightmare upon waking. Agents from Project Echo swarmed the lower levels, their flashlights cutting through the lingering darkness as they hauled Grayson upstairs. His journal clutched in singed hands like a talisman against the encroaching madness. Harlan, emerging from his catatonia with halting words, muttered commendations. You pushed it back, Doctor. Bought us time. But Grayson knew the truth. The embrace had been stalled, not severed. The void lurked in the peripheries, patient and insidious, waiting for the cracks in resolve to widen. As he was bandaged in the infirmary, Nurse Margaret hovered nearby, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. The patients, they're calming, she whispered. But her voice carried an undercurrent of doubt, as if she sensed the calm was merely the eye of a storm. By midday, the federal agents had fortified the hospital, barricading entrances and setting up perimeter watches, their radios crackling with urgent dispatches from higher-ups. Reports from the city filtered in, sporadic incidents mirroring Willowbrook's horrors, civilians in Manhattan experiencing shared nightmares, churches reporting self-etching symbols on altars, even police precincts dealing with officers turning inward, plagued by personal demons amplified to madness. Hale's escape during the relocation had not just freed his body. It had unleashed a wave the broadcast Harlan described now rippling across New York like an invisible plague. Grayson, dosed with painkillers that dulled the physical agony but sharpened his mental clarity, demanded access to the classified files Harlan's team carried. In a secured room amid stacks of redacted documents and grainy photographs, the fractured revelation began to unfold. Project Echo wasn't just an experiment, Harlan confessed, his scar pale against flushed skin. It was a weapon. Post-war, we delved into the occult archives seized from the Nazis, rituals to harness what they called vril, a force from beyond. Hale was our test subject 0, a decorated veteran with a history of shell shock. We thought we could control it, use it against the Soviets. The files painted a harrowing picture. Black and white images of a desert bunker in Nevada. 1948, where scientists in lab coats mingled with military brass, surrounding a circle of runes not unlike those Hale carved. Hale, then known as Sergeant Jonathan Hale, volunteered for what was billed as Enhanced Interrogation Resistance Training. The ritual, a fusion of ancient incantations and modern psychotronics, involved electrodes, hallucinogens, and chants amplified by speakers. It opened something, a door as Hale called it, allowing entities from the void to interface with human consciousness. At first it worked. Hale exhibited telepathic abilities, extracting secrets from test subjects without words. But the void demanded more. It fed on fear, growing stronger, turning Hale into a conduit that broadcast terrors. The project logs detailed the fallout. Lab assistants driven to suicide, visions spreading like contagion. They contained it by isolating Hale in black site asylums, redacting his history, but leaks occurred, incidents like St. Mary's, where the barrier thinned. Grayson flipped through the pages, his burns throbbing as he connected dots to his own experiences. The personal intrusions, the visions of my family, the staff's secrets, that's how it spreads. Harlan nodded grimly. It latches onto buried traumas, amplifies them, creates a feedback loop. Hale doesn't just terrify, he unravels. And now, with him loose, the signal's amplifying. A map in the files showed conduit points. Other subjects like Hale, scattered across the U.S., but New York was ground zero. Willowbrook a nexus due to its concentration of fragile minds. One entry chilled Grayson, a prophecy-like scrawl from Hale during early tests. The doctor will fracture the veil, inviting the full embrace. Was it predestined? Grayson's basement confrontation. Had it closed a door or cracked it wider? As they spoke, an agent burst in, face ashen. Sir, anomalies in the ward. Patients are sinking again. Rushing towards C, Grayson witnessed the revelation's next layer. Patients, previously subdued, stood at their door windows, eyes locked in unison toward the empty room 47. Their lips moved silently, but the air vibrated with a collective whisper. He returns. Symbols reappeared on walls, not faded but vivid, pulsing like veins. Margaret clutched her arm, where a fresh wound mirrored a rune. It itched, Doctor. Then it just appeared. The agent's jammers hummed futilely, dials spinning wildly. Grayson felt the pull anew, the void's tendrils probing his mind, revealing more visions. Not just personal, but cosmic. He saw the entities, formless shadows in an endless abyss, ancient hungers that predated stars, using humans as puppets to manifest in reality. Hale wasn't possessed. He was a willing bridge, his fractured psyche the perfect vessel. Why me? Grayson murmured, collapsing against a wall as headaches surged. Harlan pulled him aside. Because you resisted. The void craves challenge. Your fight strengthens it. The afternoon devolved into controlled panic. Agents evacuated non-essential staff, but Grayson refused, insisting on staying to document. He interviewed patients, their words a mosaic of revelation. One spoke of Hale's true name, an unpronounceable syllable that caused ears to bleed when uttered. Another described visions of alternate New Yorks, cities overrun by shadows where the void reigned. Margaret shared her own fracture, dreams of her husband's death, not accident but suicide induced by whispers she now recognized as Hale's signal. He was in an asylum before during the war. Project Echo? Grayson confirmed with files. Her husband, a early test subject, the connection a cruel twist. Emotions welled. Empathy for the victims. Horror at the government's hubris, fear for his family. He phoned home, voice cracking as he warned his wife to leave the city, but the line distorted with laughter. Hale's. As dusk fell, the storm returned with vengeance, thunder shaking the foundations. Alarms blared, perimeter breach. Agents rushed outside, gunfire echoing in the rain. Grayson, armed with a sedative syringe, joined Harlan at the entrance. There in the courtyard stood Hale, unscathed. Rain streaming down his gaunt form, eyes glowing like embers. The revelation is upon you, he intoned, voice carrying over the gale. Agents fired, but bullets veered, shadows deflecting them. Hale advanced, tendrils of darkness coiling from his fingers, embracing the nearest agent who screamed as visions consumed him. Grayson stepped forward, journal raised like a shield. I know what you are. A tool broken by men. Hale paused, smile fading. And you, doctor? Fractured by doubt. Join and heal your child. The offer tempted. Visions of Emily healthy. Family whole, but Grayson saw the lie. The void's deception. In a surge of resolve, Grayson lunged, injecting Hale with a concentrated blocker from Project Echo's kit. Hale staggered, the shadows recoiling as the drug disrupted the signal. Agents piled on, restraining him with specialized chains etched with counter runes. As Hale was dragged inside, he whispered to Grayson, "The fracture remains. In you." The ward reacted, patients collapsing, symbols dimming. But Grayson felt it, a splinter in his mind, the void seed planted. Harlan slapped cuffs on Hale, promising permanent containment. Blackwood site reinforced. This ends. Yet as Hale was loaded into a reinforced van, his eyes locked on Grayson's, a final revelation flashing between them. The project wasn't over. It evolved, with Grayson as the next conduit. The van departed into the night, leaving Willowbrook scarred, the doctor forever changed. The void's embrace a lingering shadow waiting to fully unfold. The rain had ceased, leaving Willowbrook State Hospital shrouded in an eerie, calm as the reinforced van carrying Jonathan. Hale vanished into the foggy dawn of July 22, 1952. Dr. Harold. Grayson stood at the hospital's entrance, his bandaged hands trembling as he clutched the journals, his own and Hale's, now inseparable artifacts of a nightmare that had fractured his understanding of reality. The ward behind him was quieter, the patients subdued by heavy sedatives, their chants silenced, the glowing runes on the walls faded to mere scratches, yet the air remained heavy, as if the void shadow lingered in the crevices, whispering promises of return. The federal agents, led by a now recovering Harlan, had swept through like a cleansing storm, removing evidence, sealing records, and swearing Grayson to secrecy under threat of consequences that needed no elaboration. But the silence was a lie. Grayson felt it, a splinter in his mind, a seed planted by Hale's final gaze whispering, "You are the fracture." The hospital stood as a scarred monument to the terror, its staff broken, its patients haunted, and Grayson himself teetering on the edge of a truth too vast, too horrifying to fully grasp. As he gazed at the horizon, where the city's skyline loomed like a distant promise of normalcy, he knew the story of Patient 47 wasn't over. It was merely paused, waiting for the next conduit to carry its darkness forward. This tale, born in the shadowed corridors of Willowbrook, isn't just about one man's descent into madness or a government's reckless dance with the unknown. It's a mirror held up to the fragility of the human mind, revealing how thin the veil is between sanity and chaos, between the known world and the abyss that hungers for it. Jonathan Hale, patient 47, was no mere lunatic. He was a catalyst, a broadcaster of fears that peeled back the layers of our deepest vulnerabilities. The nurses who saw their pasts exposed, the patients who chanted his prophecies, the agents who fell to their own demons, all were touched by the void's embrace. A force that didn't just terrify but transformed, leaving scars that no bandage could cover. And Grayson, the doctor who dared to resist, now carries a piece of that void within him. A haunting reminder that some doors once opened never truly close. What does this mean for us? It forces us to question, how secure are our minds? What secrets do we bury that could be weaponized? And what happens when the whispers we ignore grow loud enough to command? You, dear viewer, have journeyed with us through this harrowing tale. From the scream that shattered the night to the fractured revelation that left a hospital and a man forever changed. You've peered into the darkness, seen the void's tendrils reaching for the light of reason, and emerged on the other side, part of a rare and courageous few who dare to face the inexplicable. For that, we salute you. You're not just watching a story. You're part of a community of truth seekers, those who look where others turn away, who demand answers to questions that terrify. Your presence here, your willingness to stay until the end, marks you as one who seeks to understand the shadows that lurk within and beyond the human psyche. This story of Patient 47 is a testament to the power of the unknown, a warning that the mind is both sanctuary and battlefield. And you've walked that battlefield with us now. We invite you to make your mark. In the comments below, share your reaction with this phrase: "This story showed me the shadows in the mind." By doing so, you signal to others that you're part of this fearless collective, a community bound by curiosity for the dark and enigmatic, unafraid to confront the truths that others bury. Your words will echo, drawing more seekers to this tale, building a network of those who refuse to let the void's secrets remain hidden. And don't stop there, hit that share button. Let this story spread like a whisper in the night, reaching those who need to know, those who sense that the world holds mysteries no one dares to tell. By sharing, you become a beacon, illuminating the darkness for others, ensuring that the horrors of Willowbrook aren't forgotten but studied, understood, and guarded against. The shadows of this tale linger, don't they? They cling to you as they do to Grayson, to the walls of Willowbrook, to the city itself. Subscribe to this channel to keep those shadows in sight, to stay vigilant against the void's quiet return. Each video here is a step deeper into the strange, the sinister, the unexplained, a journey you're now part of. Imagine this channel as a lighthouse in a storm of mysteries, guiding you through the fog of the unknown, where each story is a wave crashing against the shores of reality. By subscribing, you anchor yourself to this quest, ensuring you never miss the next revelation, the next truth that could change how you see the world. Keep your curiosity alive, keep your courage burning, and let's continue this search together, for the answers lie not in the light, but in the shadows we dare to explore. The story of Patient 47 may have ended for now, but the void is patient, eternal, always listening. It waits in the corners of our minds, in the silences we avoid, ready to embrace those who falter. Grayson learned this the hard way, his life forever altered by a man who was more than a man, a project that was more than science, a terror that was more than madness. As you leave this tale, ask yourself, what whispers do you hear in your own silence? What doors have you left unopened, fearing what lies beyond? Stay with us. Keep watching. And let's uncover those truths together, for the void is always watching, and only the brave can face its gaze. Thank you for being here, for daring to know. Now comment, share, subscribe, and let's keep the light burning against the darkness that seeks to claim us all.